Segment 1, Gentle Intro. Settling into the story tonight, we will wander together through the soft, winding corridors of history. A quiet journey, not to rush, but to let our thoughts drift, like dust motes slowly turning in a golden beam of light. This is a story about time, not the rushing, loud time we know today, but the quiet time of ancient days. The kind of time measured by sun, by shadow, by the sound of water dripping, and the patient turning of gears hidden in silent wooden rooms. Close your eyes and imagine the world long before mechanical clocks, a time when day and night were the only markers, when the world moved more slowly, and the hours were kept not by machines, but by nature and the clever minds who tried to understand it. Tonight, we will explore how ancient people measured time with sundials, water clocks, and ingenious devices crafted with patience and care. Segment 2. The first idea of time before there were clocks. Time was felt. The earliest people watched the rising and setting of the sun. They felt the change in temperature, the shift in shadows, the slow arrival of dusk. To them, morning was not a number. It was the gentle light spilling over the horizon. Midday was not 12 o'clock. It was when the sun stood high, casting the smallest shadows. Evening was not 6 or 7. It was when the air cooled and the world turned amber. In those early days, there was no rush. Time was something you noticed, not something you measured. Segment 3. The earliest sun, markers in ancient villages. People began to notice that shadows could be used as guides. A stick placed in the ground would cast a shadow that moved as the sun crossed the sky. This was perhaps the first step toward measuring time. It was not precise. It was not scientific, but it was enough to know when morning had passed or when it was nearly evening. From here, simple shadow markers were built. Flat stones with carved rings, wooden posts surrounded by small pebbles. These were the first silent companions of time. Segment 4. Sundials of Egypt. Egypt, the land of golden sand and endless sun, perfected the art of the sundial. Here, tall obelisks stood not only as monuments to kings and gods, but also as great markers of time. The moving shadow would tell priests when to pray, farmers when to water their fields, and merchants when to open the market. Time in Egypt was still gentle. It flowed like the Nile, marked by shadow, but never rushed. Segment 5. The passing of hours in ancient Egypt. Egyptian time was divided into hours. But these were not hours as we know them today. Summer hours were long, winter hours short. Each day was a living rhythm, measured by sunlight in temples. Priests used portable sundials, small, carefully carved tools that could be carried in the hand. They looked like simple sticks and notches, but they were the sacred instruments of an ancient science. Segment 6. The first water clocks, as the sun could not shine at night. Another invention was born. The water clock. The Egyptians called it a clepsydra. It was a stone bowl filled with water, with a tiny hole at the bottom. As the water dripped away, the falling level told the hour. It was not perfect, but it was quiet, constant, and it worked in darkness. Segment 7. The night hours. In ancient temples, that night temples were still alive with activity. Priests prayed, observed the stars, and kept careful track of the passing hours. The water clock was their companion. Its steady drip marked the slow movement of time in the dark. In these quiet nights, the sound of water was like a heartbeat for the temple itself. Segment 8. Water clocks of Babylon. Babylon 2. embraced the water clock. Their designs were intricate bronze vessels, engraved with symbols, measuring hours with remarkable care. These clocks were used not only for daily life, but for astronomy, helping Babylonian scholars track the movements of the stars and planets. Segment 9. The rhythm of daily life. With water clocks and sundials, daily life began to take shape. Markets opened at certain hours. Temples followed fixed schedules. Even armies timed their watches by the flow of water. Still, life remained gentle. Time was a guide, not a master. Segment 10. Transition to Greece. As we drift forward, our path leads to Greece, a land of philosophers, scholars, and inventors. Here, timekeeping would take on both beauty and precision. The Greeks inherited the sundial and water clock, but gave them elegance, geometry, and artistry. Segment 11. Greek innovations. In Greece, the sundial became a familiar friend in the city square. Marble and bronze instruments, carefully carved, stood in gardens and courtyards. The Greeks studied the angle of the sun and adjusted their designs for different seasons. They even created portable sundials, which travelers could carry with them, aligning them to the sun wherever they went. But perhaps most remarkable was their refinement of the water clock. Segment 12. The Greek water clock, or clepsydra. Greek clepsydra was a simple, elegant device. Water would drip steadily from one vessel to another, marking the passing of time. It was used in law courts to ensure that speakers had only their allotted moments to speak. It was used in debates, in games, and in temples. The gentle sound of water, a constant and steady flow, was a quiet reminder that time was always moving, even when the world seemed still. Segment 13. Time in the Agorian, the bustling agora. The market square, the rhythm of life followed the sun. Shops opened when the shadows were short. Meetings began when the water clocks signaled the hour. There was a soft harmony to it all. Time did not rule life harshly. It guided it, like a soft hand leading someone along a garden path. Segment 14. Rome inherits the clock. As Greece faded and Rome rose, the knowledge of timekeeping traveled with it. The Romans built sundials in their forums, large and public, so that all could see. But the Romans were also practical. They adjusted the hours for the seasons, and their water clocks became more advanced, sometimes fitted with dials and markings to show the hours more clearly. Segment 15. Water clocks in Roman life. In Roman men, life timekeeping became part of the daily order. Soldiers timed their watches. Bathhouses opened and closed at specific hours. Games in the amphitheater were timed for the entertainment of the crowd. Still, the pace of life was measured. Time ticked quietly, marked by shadow and water, not by rushing seconds. Segment 16. To the east. China's water clocks. Far to the east, China had developed water clocks long before many in the West. By the Han Dynasty, water clocks were used. In astronomy, some were simple bowls, while others were great towers with carefully measured drops and turning wheels. These clocks helped scholars predict eclipses, track the stars, and understand the changing seasons. Segment 17. The astronomical towers. In later centuries, Chinese inventors built magnificent astronomical towers. These were not just clocks, but machines of wonder, with water flowing through hidden channels, turning wheels and drums, marking the hours of the day and night. They were marvels of engineering, and they inspired later clockmakers across the world. Segment 18. The Islamic Golden Age. In the lands of the Islamic Golden Age, Scholars studied Greek, Roman, and Indian texts, and improved upon them. They built elegant water clocks, sometimes shaped like animals, sometimes as great public displays in markets or mosques. These clocks often combined artistry and science, showing the beauty of time as well as its passage. Segment 19. Medieval Europe learns. Again in medieval Europe, timekeeping began slowly. Monasteries kept time with bells, ringing at set hours for prayer. At first, these hours were measured by simple devices, candles marked with lines, water clocks that dripped steadily in the stillness of the cloister. Segment 20. The quiet end of the water clock eras. Mechanical clocks began to appear. The age of the water clock faded, but for thousands of years, these simple devices had kept the rhythm of life. Water dripping in a bowl, a shadow slowly moving on stone. These had been the gentle guardians of time, and even now, their quiet memory remains in museums, in ruins, and in the stories of history. Closing segment, a soft ending, and so our journey drifts to its end. From the first stick in the earth, casting a long shadow, to the elegant towers of water and wheels, we have traveled quietly through the centuries. Time has always been with us, a patient companion, measured in light, in water, and in the gentle turning of the world. As you rest now, let the story fade like the last shadow of evening. The hours will pass softly, just as they always have, carried gently forward into the quiet of night. Segment 11. Greek innovations expanded. The sun rose slowly over the marble cities of Greece, its light touching the edges of white columns, and spilling gently into gardens, courtyards, and city squares. In these places, among olive trees and shaded arcades, stood devices that would have seemed like simple decorations to a passerby. But they were more than that. They were the sundials of Greece, carved from stone or cast from bronze. These sundials were shaped with care. Their surfaces were marked with precise lines, each one representing an hour in the shifting day. Citizens in the agora would glance at them casually, just as one might glance at a clock today. Merchants knew when to set up their stalls, and philosophers knew when to gather students for discussion. The Greeks understood that the hours changed with the seasons. They designed their sundials to reflect this gentle variation, so that time flowed naturally with the rhythm of the year. Some sundials were small, portable devices that travelers could take on long journeys. Others were grand and permanent, standing in gardens where the shadows moved slowly across carved stone. It was a practical science, but also a quiet art. Segment 12. The Greek water clock, or clepsydra, expanded in Greece. Another device became part of daily life, the clepsydra, the water thief. This clock was a simple vessel, sometimes of bronze, sometimes of stone. It had a small hole near the base, through which water would flow at a steady rate. As the water level dropped, markings on the inside of the vessel would reveal how much time had passed. It was used in law courts, where speakers were given only a certain amount of time to make their arguments. Imagine a courtroom in Athens. The air is warm. The sound of voices fills the space, and in the corner, a clepsydra drips steadily, measuring out the moments of speech. When the last drop falls, the time is over. The voice must fall silent. The clepsydra was also used in scholarly debates, in games, and in religious rituals. Its gentle flow was a reminder that time was always moving, but never in haste. Segment 13. Chiming the agora expanded the agora, the market square of Greece, was alive with activity. Here, the day began slowly, as merchants set out their goods beneath shaded awnings. Olive sellers arranged their jars, fishmongers displayed their catch, potters stacked their wares in neat rows. Overhead, the sun cast its first strong rays, and the shadows of the sundials began their measured journey. Meetings of citizens might be called at a particular hour. The water clock in the city office might signal the start of a debate, yet life was not rushed. The hours came and went like waves on a calm shore. No one hurried to chase them. Segment 14. Rome inherits the clock, expanded as Greece passed. Into memory, Rome rose, and with it came a new chapter in the story of time. Rome was a place of order. Its streets ran straight. Its aqueducts flowed steadily. Its calendar was carefully marked, and in the heart of its cities, in the bustling forums, stood sundials. Some were simple, a single column casting a shadow on carved stone. Others were elaborate, with inscriptions and markings that told the hours for each month of the year. Romans adjusted the hours to fit the seasons. Summer hours were long, winter hours short. It was a practical system, suited to the rhythm of daylight. The sundials stood quietly, casting their shadows as senators debated, merchants traded, and children played in the open squares. Segment 15. Water clocks in Roman life expanded. The Romans also embraced the water clock. In workshops, engineers built devices that measured time with flowing water and turning wheels. These clocks were more than simple bowls. They sometimes had floating markers that rose or fell as the water level changed. Some had dials to show the passing hours more clearly. In military camps, water clocks helped keep watch schedules. In bathhouses, they marked the opening and closing times. In amphitheaters, games were timed so that the day's events flowed smoothly. Time in Rome was still gentle, but it was more organized now. The rhythm of the city was shaped by these quiet instruments. Segment 16. To the east, China's water clocks expanded far away. In the lands of the Han Dynasty, time was measured with equal care in China. Water clocks had been known for centuries. Simple vessels were used to mark the hours of night and day. But the Chinese scholars looked beyond the simple marking of time. They used these clocks to observe the heavens. In quiet observatories, with scrolls spread before them, they tracked the stars and predicted eclipses. The steady drip of water was the heartbeat of their science. Some clocks were large bronze vessels, engraved with dragons or clouds. Others were smaller, used in private studies. Each one was part of a long tradition of careful, patient observation. Segment 17. The astronomical towers expanded in later centuries. Chinese inventors built truly remarkable machines. Among them were astronomical clock towers, rising high above the city streets. These were not simple clocks. They were intricate devices, powered by water and wheels, marking the hours with astonishing precision. Some towers displayed the movement of the sun, moon, and stars. Others released mechanical figures, tiny wooden men or birds that appeared. At certain hours, at night, lamps lit the faces of these towers, and the quiet turning of the mechanisms marked the slow, steady passage of time. Segment 18. The Islamic Golden Age expanded in the lands of the Islamic Golden Age. Scholars preserved and expanded the knowledge of earlier civilizations. Greek and Roman texts were translated. Indian astronomy was studied, and water clocks were built with new elegance and skill. These clocks were sometimes public marvels, placed in marketplaces or courtyards. Some were shaped like animals, elephants, peacocks, lions that moved as the water flowed in the great cities. Such clocks were admired not only for their usefulness, but for their beauty. They reflected a deep understanding that science and art could move together, just as time and beauty flowed in harmony. Segment 19. Medieval Europe learns again. Expanded in medieval Europe. Time moved slowly. In monasteries, the hours were marked by the ringing of bells. These bells called monks to prayer at fixed times, each day and night. To measure these hours, monks sometimes used water clocks, kept in still, quiet rooms. The dripping water was the steady companion of their work. In some places, candles marked with lines were used to keep time, each mark representing an hour as the wax burned away. It was a simple system, but in the quiet life of the monastery, it was enough. Segment 20. The quiet end of the water clock era expanded over time. Mechanical clocks began to appear. At first, they were rare and expensive, placed in great towers or churches. But slowly, they replaced the old water clocks, the gentle dripping bowls, the carefully marked vessels, the astronomical towers. These became part of history, yet their quiet spirit remains. For thousands of years, water clocks and sundials had guided daily life. Even now, in museums and ancient ruins, you can see them still, silent but not forgotten. Segment 21. The first mechanical whispers. As the medieval centuries moved on, something new began to stir in workshops. In small rooms lit by oil lamps, craftsmen worked slowly at wooden benches. Gears of iron and brass lay scattered across their tables. The air was warm with the smell of metal filings and wood shavings. These men were clockmakers. Their craft was still young, still uncertain, but it was a craft that would change how people understood time. The first mechanical clocks were large, meant for towers and churches. They did not have faces or hands, not yet. They simply rang a bell at regular intervals, marking the hours with sound instead of shadow or water. Segment 22. Bells in the town square. Imagine a small European town, its streets quiet in the early morning. A thin mist lies over the roofs, and then a bell rings out from the church tower. The sound drifts over the market square, over the houses, over the fields beyond. For the townspeople, this is the call to begin the day. Shops open. Bakers bring fresh loaves to their windows. Farmers bring carts of produce to the market stalls. The hours now have a voice, deep, clear, and steady. Segment 23. Monastic precision in monasteries. The bells were even more important. Prayer was held at fixed hours, matins, before dawn, lauds, at sunrise. Vespers in the fading light of evening. Mechanical clocks made it possible to keep these hours more precisely. In the stillness of the cloister, a clock ticked slowly in a small room, its gears turning with patient regularity. It was not hurried. It was not loud. It was steady, like the rhythm of breathing. Segment 24. From towers to towns over time, mechanical clocks began to appear in more towns. A blacksmith might build one for the town hall. A merchant might commission one for his guild. These clocks were heavy, their weights and gears hidden inside wooden frames. Some were simple. Others grew more ornate, with figures that moved at certain hours, a knight striking a bell, a rooster flapping its wings, or a saint turning slowly in a niche. They were marvels to the townspeople, but still rare. Segment 25. The hours grow. More regular with mechanical clocks, time became more even. No longer did hours stretch long in summer and short in winter. The new clocks divided the day into equal parts, day after day, season after season. It was a quiet change, but it began to shape life in new ways. Markets opened and closed at set hours. Workshops kept steady schedules. Travelers planned their journeys by the striking of bells. Time was still gentle, but it was becoming a little more precise. Segment 26. The craft of Clockmaking was a careful art in workshops. Apprentices learned to cut gears with patient hands. They shaped teeth from brass, smoothed surfaces with fine files, and polished shafts until they shone. Masters taught them how to measure with care, how to balance the weight of gears, and how to listen, really listen to the steady heartbeat of a clock. Each clock was unique, a blend of skill, patience, and quiet pride. Segment 27. Public clocks are symbols in many towns. The public clock became a symbol of pride. When a new clock was installed, people gathered in the square to watch. They admired the craftsmanship, the slow, steady movement of the gears, the bell that rang out clearly across the rooftops. It was more than a machine. It was a promise that time would be kept faithfully, day after day. Segment 28. The gentle spread of time. As more towns built clocks, the sound of bells spread across the countryside. Travelers passing from one town to another could hear the bells of one fading into the distance as the next came into earshot. Time now had a steady rhythm, marked by the hours in a way that had never been possible before. Yet still, the days were not rushed. The pace of life remained slow, the hours unfolding like the turning of a page. Segment 29. Clocks in homes in time. Clocks began to appear in homes. At first, they were rare and costly, beautiful pieces of craftsmanship owned by wealthy merchants or nobles. These early household clocks were often weight-driven, with careful wooden cases and simple dials. In quiet rooms, they ticked softly, their hands moving slowly across the face, marking the hours as families went about their days. Segment 30. The quiet march forward. The age of water clocks had passed. The age of mechanical clocks was growing, but the change was gentle, spreading slowly from town to town, from tower to home. The steady ticking of gears joined the soft chiming of bells, adding a new voice to the quiet music of life. Time was now kept more precisely than ever before, but still it moved with a calm, steady grace. Segment 31. The clockmaker's den. The small rooms of medieval towns. Clockmakers began their days quietly. A single window let in the pale morning light. On the workbench lay fine tools, files, chisels, hammers, and delicate calipers for measuring. The clockmaker worked patiently, shaping gears and adjusting springs. Every piece had to fit perfectly. Every gear had to turn with just the right amount of freedom. It was work of quiet concentration. Hours might pass without the clockmaker noticing. The ticking of a test mechanism kept company with the gentle sounds of wood being planed, metal being polished, and the occasional soft sigh as a stubborn part was coaxed into place. Segment 32. Clocks as gifts. Clocks were rare enough that when they were given as gifts, they were treasured deeply. A noble might present a clock to a church or monastery, where it would be installed in the tower or the cloister. A wealthy merchant might have a clock built for his household, a fine piece of craftsmanship to pass on to his children. These clocks were more than tools. They were heirlooms, symbols of care and permanence, objects to be tended and kept for generations. Segment 33. The bell as a guide in towns and cities. The bell remained the voice of time from the tallest tower. Its sound drifted through the air, marking each hour. For farmers in the fields, the bell told them when to pause for a meal. For merchants, it signaled when to open or close shop. For travelers, it marked how far the day had gone. The sound was familiar, comforting and steady, a companion that kept life in rhythm. Segment 34. The rhythm of a town. The whole town seemed to move with the gentle guidance of the clock. In the morning, the first bell rang softly over the rooftops. The market square began to fill. Chatter and movement replaced the quiet of dawn. At midday, another bell rang, calling workers to pause, families to gather for a meal. As evening came, the bells rang once more, marking the close of the working day. Life was measured, but never hurried. Segment 35. Travelers and time travelers, moving from place to place, often relied on the sound of bells. As they approached a new town, they could hear the bell from miles away. The sound grew clearer, carried on the wind. It was a sign of arrival, of rest, and of welcome. In the next town, another clock would mark the hours, keeping them connected to the rhythm of the land, even far from home. Segment 36. The clock. In the workshop. In workshops, the ticking of a clock kept quiet company with the work at hand. Blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, and shoemakers worked steadily through the day, the sound of their tools blending softly with the distant chime of the hour. The clock was not a taskmaster. It was a gentle reminder, a guide to keep the day in balance. Segment 37. Evening. Hours. As evening fell, the sound of the bell took on a different tone. It marked the closing of shops. It called families home. It signaled to travelers that the gates of the town would soon close. In quiet homes, candles were lit, meals were shared. The clock ticked softly in the background, its steady sound a reminder that the day was ending. Segment 38. The night watch. Yvonne. At night, time was kept. In the darkened streets, the night watch moved slowly, their lanterns casting pools of warm light. The clock tower marked each hour, its sound carrying through the still air. In quiet houses, people slept peacefully, trusting the clock and the watchman would keep the night steady and safe. Segment 39. Clocks as symbols of stability. The clock became more than a measure of time. It became a symbol of order, of safety, of community. In uncertain times, the steady ticking and ringing of the clock was a comfort. It reminded people that life still moved forward, hour by hour, day by day. Segment 40. A gentle transition forward. The story of timekeeping continued to move forward quietly, from the earliest sundials to the water clocks of ancient temples, and now to the mechanical clocks of towns and homes. Each step had been careful, unhurried. Time itself was unchanged, but the ways of marking it had grown more refined, more steady, and more constant. Segment 41. The Renaissance awakens. The Renaissance brought with it a new energy for beauty and precision. In towns and cities, the clock became not only a tool, but a work of art. Clockmakers designed faces painted with rich colors. They carved cases with fine patterns of flowers and leaves. They built towers where gilded hands moved gracefully across polished dials. Timekeeping was no longer only a matter of utility. It had become something to be admired. Segment 42. The art of the clock face. In workshops, artists and craftsmen worked side by side. Painters decorated clock faces with delicate scenes, the sun, the moon, the turning of the seasons, added gold leaf, so that the numbers caught the light. Even the smallest clocks were treated with care, each one carrying a little piece of beauty into the homes and halls, where they would quietly tick away the hours. Segment 43, Public Clocks. Of the Renaissance in city squares, public clocks became points of pride and wonder. People gathered beneath them to watch the turning of the hands, or to see small figures appear as the hours were struck. In some cities, mechanical animals moved. In others, bells were struck by figures of knights or by angels with shining wings. The clock tower stood as a reminder that the city's life was steady, measured, and harmonious. Segment 44, the growth of domestic clocks. More and more clocks began to find their way into homes. They were still costly, but merchants, scholars, and skilled tradesmen might save to own one. These clocks were often beautifully made. Some had simple painted faces. Others were adorned with carvings or inlays. In quiet rooms, the soft ticking filled the air, a calm, constant presence. Segment 45, the gentle sound of time. The sound of a clock in the home was never loud. It was a background sound, steady and unchanging. It marked the hours without interrupting the flow of life. Children played, meals were prepared, letters were written, all while the clock ticked softly nearby. It was a sound that could be trusted. Segment 46, time in the workshop. In workshops and studies, the presence of a clock helped shape the day. Scholars might work by candlelight, the ticking of a clock reminding them when the evening hours grew late. Merchants used clocks to keep business in order. Sailors prepared their voyages with an eye to the hour, trusting that the clock could guide them as surely as the stars. Segment 47, the clock as a teacher. The clock also became a quiet teacher. Children learned to read the hours from its face. They learned that time moved steadily forward, minute by minute, hour by hour. It taught them that patience was rewarded, that each hour brought change, even if it was slow and gentle. Segment 48, the steady rhythm of daily life in the Renaissance city. The rhythm of daily life was shaped by the clock. Shops opened when the bells rang. Markets bustled in the mid-morning. Church services were held at fixed hours. The sound of the clock was woven into the sound of the city. Horses' hooves on cobblestones, merchants calling in the streets, bells chiming across the rooftops. Segment 49, clocks in distant lands. Craft of clockmaking spread quietly across borders in England, France, and Germany. Clockmakers shared ideas, improving the mechanisms. Clocks traveled with traders, appeared in distant cities, and slowly became a familiar part of daily life in places far from where they had been made. Segment 50, a gentle turning point by the end of the Renaissance. The clock had truly taken its place in the world. No longer rare, it was still precious, a symbol of care, craftsmanship, and quiet order. Time, once measured only by shadow or dripping water, was now marked by the steady turning of hands, the soft chiming of bells, and the quiet heartbeat of gears. Segment 51, early modern clocks appear as the 17th century began. The craft of clockmaking entered a new chapter. Clocks became smaller, more precise, and more intricate. The balance spring was invented, allowing clocks to keep time with greater accuracy than ever before. Though the invention was remarkable, its presence in daily life remained quiet, a refinement that simply made the ticking a little steadier. Segment 52, the clockmakers. Workshop in a new age in the towns of Europe. The clockmaker's workshop was still a place of patient labor. The tools had changed only slightly. The workbench was still worn smooth by years of use. But the clocks being built were now more delicate, with finer gears and more intricate faces. Apprentices learned the old ways, but they also learned the new techniques, passing the knowledge forward quietly from one generation to the next. Segment 53. Clocks in the merchant's house. In the homes of merchants, clocks had become a familiar sight. A tall clock might stand in the hallway, its pendulum swinging gently in the main room. A smaller table clock might tick softly beside the fire. Visitors would notice these clocks, not as rare wonders, but as trusted companions of the household. Segment 54. Clocks in the city. In the cities, the clock tower remained the great voice of time. Bells rang at the hour, marking the day's progress. Merchants kept to their schedules. Carriages arrived and departed with greater punctuality. The life of the city moved more steadily than ever before, guided quietly by the clock. Segment 55. The clock and the countryside. Devon. In the countryside, the presence of the clock was felt. In farmhouses, a single clock might mark the hours. Its steady ticking was part of the background of life, as natural as the creak of the floorboards or the sound of wind in the trees. Farmers worked by the sun, but the clock gave gentle structure to their day. Segment 56. The sound of the pendulum. The pendulum, swinging gently back and forth, became a familiar sound in many homes. Its slow, even rhythm was like a steady breath in quiet moments. You could hear it, a calm, patient presence, marking the time without haste. Segment 57. The clock as a daily companion. By now, the clock was no longer rare. It had become a daily companion. It stood quietly in homes, workshops, and shops. It ticked in the background of life, measuring the hours without interrupting them. Segment 58. The passing of generations. Clocks began to pass from one generation to the next. A father might give a clock to his son or daughter, just as his own father had done. These clocks became more than machines. They carried memories, the sound of a home, the rhythm of days gone by. Segment 59. Clocks as trusted friends. In the early modern world, the clock was trusted. It did not demand attention. It simply kept its steady watch, reliable and constant. It marked the hours of work, the times of meals, the moments of rest. It was always there, quietly present. Segment 60. A gentle path forward. As the early modern age moved on, clocks continued to improve. They became more accurate, more beautifully made, and more present in daily life. But their role remained the same: to keep the steady rhythm of the day, to provide a quiet measure of life's unfolding hours. Final segment, a quiet ending. So, our journey through timekeeping comes to a close. From the first sundials casting their shadows in the ancient world, to the water clocks dripping gently in courts and gardens, to the quiet ticking of wooden clocks in homes and workshops, time has been a patient companion. It has moved with us through seasons, through generations, through centuries. The clocks we have followed were never hurried. They marked the hours softly, without rush, without noise. Even now, their quiet spirit remains. In museums, in old towers, in the memories of families who still keep their old clocks. They continue to mark the hours with gentle care. And as you,